Hello, I'm Chris Fowler for Sports Century. Eric Lindros looked like something the hockey gods had assembled with great care. But with all that ability came vulnerability as well. There were concussions to go with the hat tricks, and there was unending controversy to accompany the splattering checks. Most of his still young life was spent in a fishbowl, and over the next 30 minutes, we'll take you there.
From the very earliest part of his life, people have always wanted a piece of him. And I think that that's made him suspicious, and it's made him draw into himself and draw very close to his family.
What he needs to do more than anything is to jettison that image of the pampered daddy and mommy's boy, and then when he steps out of that shadow, that's when he will have completely won the battle.
He's been handed a package of gifts so profound and has made decisions that are so far-reaching, he can't outrun his past. He's Shakespearean.
From the start, Eric Lindros was marked as a prodigy. He stood out because of his size, his skill, and his parents. His father, Carl, is his agent. His mother, Bonnie, was a vocal and visible presence.
I wouldn't call it his career. I'd call it their career. Had they been able to lace it up and go out on the ice and play wings with him, I think they would have done that. I think they felt, because they put so much time and energy into his career, that they deserved to be part of it.
You remember Nixon had an enemies list. Well, I think Bonnie Lindros had an enemies list as well about who she saw had mistreated her son.
Bobby Clark is usually able to intimidate every agent that he deals with. Carl Lindros is a very confident, self-assured man. He's unflappable, so Clark's act of yelling and screaming never worked.
After talking to people in the Flyers organization, you're saying, you can't believe what this guy's asking. He's telling us who we should trade for and who should be on the same line with Eric Lindros. Who is this guy?
I feel for Bob Clark, too, as a GM, going through all that. I mean, you want some guy's dad calling you up all the time saying, well, you better trade this guy and get this guy.
Bob Clark couldn't stand his mom and dad. He has his first concussion, and he gets the phone call on his cell as he's in the ambulance. It's his mother. And Bob Clark later tells people, oh, isn't that nice? Mommy called.
It was as ugly as I've seen a relationship between a general manager and a player.
Here at this organization, I could care less about him.
The Flyers were downright vindictive. They began to develop such a hatred toward the Eric Lindros persona, where his parents controlled his actions.
I thought it was disgraceful, the way the Flyers not only publicly attacked Eric, but the way the Flyers attacked Eric's parents.
Once we made up our minds that we weren't going to allow him and his dad to abuse people who work here anymore, then we were fine.
Is Bob Clark telling the truth? Is the Lindros family telling the truth? Is there any player in professional sports that has this kind of baggage that surrounds them?
On April 1st, 1999 in Nashville, Lindros suffered an injury, first believed to be bruised ribs. Within hours, there was hemorrhaging, first in Lindros' chest, and then in his relationship with the Flyers.
I just fell asleep in the tub. It was more comfortable to be in there. I couldn't really lay down, so I went into the tub and just fell asleep there.
He had gotten out of the bathtub and started walking towards the bed and was very white. And I kind of looked at him and said, man, you don't look too good. And he goes, yeah, I don't feel too good. And I said, oh, we'll call the trainer.
There's a 3-hour gap here before Eric Lindros is actually hospitalized. And I think the Flyers would agree now that that shouldn't have happened.
Discussions began that they're going to send Lindros back to Philadelphia to be examined by Philadelphia doctors. Keith Jones says, no, you're not. He steps in and says, this guy needs to go to the hospital right now.
He did have a life-threatening injury to his right chest with loss of 3 liters of blood into the chest.
He had a punctured lung. Had he got on that flight to go back to Philadelphia, doctors say, without a doubt, he would have died.
If you ask the players, they will tell you today, yeah, the Flyers probably should have done something more quickly if they had known about it. But how dumb are you? I mean, you got a punctured lung. You can barely breathe. You've turned a cadaver white, and you don't think to go to the hospital?
Lindros' parents wrote Ed Snyder, the longtime chairman of the Flyers, raising serious questions about the care or lack of it their son had received. Snyder retaliated.
Snyder told me, you might want to look into a rumor that I hear that Eric wasn't really injured that night on the ice. He was drunk and in a car accident, and it's all been covered up. Well, now here you have the owner directing a reporter to investigate an ugly, unsubstantiated rumor about his star player.
Somehow he was a magnet for the most bizarre, controversial incidents of the past 10 years in Philadelphia.
It's that relationship between Eric and his meddlesome parents that has been the albatross around his neck since the day he started playing hockey.
It has no bearing. It's just trash. Who would be better equipped to be your agent than someone who's got a master's in business? Who's your father? He's always got your best interests at heart.
Eric doesn't see any problem with being close to his parents. Everybody wants him to break away from the parents. Why should he break away? That's how he sees it. He's my dad. What, am I gonna fire my dad as my agent?
Eric Lindros' life is an open book. Probably an Icelandic saga. There have been so many chapters. And they've been so open because Eric was identified at a phenomenally young age as the next one.
This kid was trying to go to school, grade school, and he was being anointed the next Wayne Gretzky.
The oldest of 3 children, Eric was born on February 28, 1973 in London, Ontario. By the time he was 9, his parents realized they had a phenom on their hands. Carl and Bonnie regarded this as heavy-duty responsibility. They weren't just mom and dad, they were guardians of a gift.
When they moved to Toronto, when Eric was 9 or 10, they had a backyard swimming pool, and his father tore that up himself and built a hockey rink back there.
What Carl Lindros would do is he would go down and get the Zamboni ice at the rink, and he'd put it at the fringe of their backyard, and he'd spray the hose and ice it down. So there'd be one layer of ice. The next morning, he'd go and spray another layer of water into this rink. And when they would get home from school, presto, they had maple leaf gardens.
It was like your favorite toy. But it didn't matter how old you were, you didn't outgrow it.
At 16, Lindros was drafted by a junior franchise 450 miles away. He refused to report, and the Ontario Hockey League later adopted the so-called Lindros rule, permitting him to play closer to home. That was seen as a double standard. It was a criticism that would follow him for years. It's okay to be exceptional, unfair to be granted exceptions.
He's belted by Lindros. Scores!
He has had preferential treatment, but the hockey world has given him preferential treatment. Not once did the hockey world say, no, we have rules, you obey the rules.
That type of independence is something we generally tend to celebrate. Instead, Eric was seen as someone who wanted to destroy this great tradition.
He was branded as a bad guy, and he received threatening letters.
Baby bottles were thrown on the ice. Pacifiers were thrown on the ice.
Signs to the effect that he was a big baby and a mama's boy.
There was a fan that was heckling him, and when Eric left the arena after the game, the fan came up and asked him for an autograph. He graciously gave the autograph, and the fan spit at him.
The Quebec Nordiques are very proud to select as first pick overall in the 1991 NHL annual draft, Eric Lindros.
By refusing to play for the Nordiques, a bedraggled team, not only was he flouting NHL convention, the inference was, I don't like your province. And given the political dynamics of Quebec, it was absolute dynamite.
That wasn't an insult to Quebec, that was an insult to the whole country. Everybody said, well, then kiss off.
It really ticked off a lot of players when Eric took that stance. Nobody had ever really done that, and there was a lot of guys waiting to kick this kid's butt when he got into the league.
It really hit Eric that night after the draft. He knew he was an object of vilification at the moment. It just kind of hit him like a ton of bricks, and he began sobbing on his brother's shoulder.
On June 20th, 1992, Quebec traded Lindros, not just once, but twice, to both the Rangers and Flyers. An arbitrator was required to unravel the legal knots. He ruled in favor of Philadelphia.
Because we were going through a lot of labor problems ourselves, a lot of us players were thrilled. And there's many stories of players that went up to Eric in his first year and thanked him.
And he stood out in the middle of all these controversies. Now he gets to Philadelphia, and he doesn't want to do separate interviews because then he would stand out from his teammates. Well, that ship has sailed. You've already chosen by your actions to stand out. Sorry, but you are different.
He could never just be one of the boys because he was Eric Lindros, the next one, the player that we gave up 6 players and draft choices and cash to get, the one that will lead us to our next championship.
They gave him their own PR guy to shepherd him around. As the Flyers separated him from the team, I think the other players began to resent the fact that, all right, this guy better come through.
He carried the burden probably more than any player that I've ever played with in order to send this team over the hump to make this Stanley Cup Finals and to win a Stanley Cup.
Eric Lindros seemed to be climbing the mountain methodically. In 1994, the 21-year-old center was named captain. In 95, league MVP. In 96, he scored a career-high 115 points. And in 97, Lindros powered the Flyers into the Stanley Cup Finals.
The Flyers beat the Penguins in the first round of the playoffs, and Lemieux almost literally passed the torch to Lindros. Lemieux even talked about it.
He was just an amazing talent. It's Michael Jordan on ice. There is no way you could come away from the game and not say, man, that guy is the best player I have ever seen.
Getting in front, Lindros, and he's got a hat trick! And he battled through Mark Messier!
What had been so promising ended abruptly. The Flyers were swept by the Red Wings in the finals, and the damage extended far beyond the defeats.
So what should have been a fabulous, fabulous season turned into a season that ended with just a terribly bitter taste. The coach being fired, assertions that the star player Lindros had got the coach fired.
He is right there, ready to jump over that ledge to be the most successful player of his era, and then it all falls apart when he doesn't win the cup, and when the Flyers then start to become thin-skinned about what he says and how he feels and about the family.
Initially, Flyers general manager Bobby Clarke was ally and mentor for Lindros, seeing much of himself in the young star. But what was champagne would turn to vinegar.
I remember Clarkie coming out on the ice, taking face-offs with us, putting the gear on, and you know, he was practicing with us. I mean, they were like real good friends.
I had never seen such a strong relationship between player and upper management. It's hard to see how that thing deteriorated as bad as it did.
Bob Clarke issued the challenge, which was, if you expect to be paid as the highest player in the game, then you have to perform as the highest paid player in the game.
Bob Clarke, fairly or unfairly, expects everyone who plays the game to be the same as he was. And the way he was a pit bull.
Bobby Clarke certainly created the impression that there were times when Eric Lindros wasn't hurt as badly as he said he was, and that he could have played. And the Lindroses will tell you that under no circumstances was he in any shape to go on the ice, and that the Flyers were pressuring him.
At 6'4" and 235 pounds, Lindros' style was that of a runaway locomotive. He dealt out fearsome punishment, but also absorbed it. In 8 seasons with Philadelphia, Lindros missed 140 regular season games.
He could run all over everybody, and nobody in junior hockey would even think of going near him. So he got in the habit of going up the ice with his head down and cutting into center, which is deadly.
In March of 2000, Lindros was jolted by what eventually would be diagnosed as his 4th concussion in 2 years. But despite suffering headaches and forgetting shifts, he played the next 4 games and then blamed the Flyers for allowing him to do so.
The Flyers say he didn't give them all the symptoms. However, Eric says he gave them enough of the symptoms that they should have taken him out of the lineup.
John Worley knew I saw, everything went to a yellow tinge, and that I came in after the period and that I had vomited. I was just hoping that, that the team would take me out, knowing what went on. I'm really unhappy about what's going on here.
What Eric did that day was publicly dismantle his relationship with the Flyers. And this was the captain, this was the most popular athlete in Philadelphia saying, I don't trust the people that I work for.
4 days later, Clark ordered Lindros stripped of his captaincy. It was like watching a statue brought crashing down in the town square.
They actually invited television stations to come to watch the sowing of the sea on Eric Desjardins' jersey. That's how poisonous it got at the end, where the Flyers wanted to make a public spectacle of the toppling of Eric Lindros.
Lindros criticized our trainers, criticized our doctors, criticized our organization. He shouldn't be captain of it. If he's that unhappy with us all, he shouldn't be captain of us, our team.
You would assume that even off the record, there would be howls from the locker room. There were none.
For 7 of the 8 years, the organization did nothing but tell us how wonderful he was. And it just suddenly was like turning off a light. In 1 second, nobody liked him anymore.
A lot of the sentiment towards Eric changed in the dressing room. All of a sudden, he was starting to get nicked up with some comments. He was starting to get nicked up with some animosity from player to player.
Without Lindros, his teammates mounted an unexpected charge through the playoffs, drawing within 1 win of the finals. Against the Devils, Lindros returned for Game 6, a Philadelphia loss. Game 7, and what would be his last appearance as a Flyer, another loss, and a shattering hit.
Here's 88. Lindros makes the move, and Lindros is hammered down to the ice by Scott Stevens.
As a player, you felt sick to your stomach. I thought, was the guy dead? It was probably one of the scariest on-ice things that I had seen in my career.
Sources close to Lindros say following the Stevens hit, the Flyers initially refused to pay for his medical expenses. The team has declined comment. The Lindros Flyers divorce was punctuated by a statement from team chairman Ed Snyder that the player for whom they had mortgaged so much had damned the entire organization.
I'm out with a couple of concussions. I come back and play with 1 practice on your boat. Yeah, so I really turned on the team. You know, I really turned on Ed Snyder. I really didn't give it my all. And Game 7, yeah, I guess being knocked out, that was really damning to the team.
1 year, he was going to lead the Flyers to the Cup and be the hero. 2 years later, he was a bum, kick him out.
On the ice, he's turned to people and he said, "Listen for me, I sound different. You will hear me coming," which of course is a frightening scenario.
You go back to get a puck, and if his intent was for nothing other than to physically damage you, you'd get squished up against the boards and go, oh.
Once things didn't go Eric's way, Eric's just going to be a bully and run around and make everybody scared. And you know what? I'll get the room I want, and then I'll go out and score.
I don't think Eric has ever wanted to be perceived as a Darth Vader type, as being the ruthless force, as being a mean player. He's actually a gentle guy.
He's a bit of an iceberg. What you get and what you see is probably 3% of what the entire person is, and only in rare moments does he really express himself.
Thank you to the fans of Philadelphia who've supported us when we weren't so good. We're getting better, and we're gonna do it.
This is a guy that once called me at home and said, "Hey, can you put your wife on the phone? I'm having trouble with this chicken I'm cooking. I want to ask her some questions." That shows you how human he was.
When he started doing charity work, most of it was with the Children's Miracle Network. And he would go over to players' houses that had kids and play with their kids, because that was the part of his life he missed.
He was really deeply affected when my son had his accident, fell out the window in Philadelphia. He'd installed bars on all the top-level windows and stuff like that to make sure that wasn't going to happen again.
I'd love to have Eric as a neighbor. I would trust him. He is completely misunderstood by the majority of people that are on the outside looking in.
Following his falling out with the Flyers, Eric Lindros spent his season in limbo, hoping Philadelphia would trade him, preferably to his hometown Maple Leafs.
I don't know if I've ever seen a player get so much attention for not playing.
He's never scored 50 goals. He's never won a Stanley Cup. He's never had a full season. And yet, this is the second Gretzky. This ain't even the first Lindros.
In August of 2001, New York acquired Lindros and promptly sewed the Scarlet A for alternate captain on his jersey. While Clark continued to snipe, Lindros chose to skate on.
There's a lot of misconception of things that were going on off the ice. and the focus wasn't on what was going on the ice. And there was a couple of years where it really slid. I'm happy that it's over.
But Lindros was hardly the savior, as he was unable to deliver the Rangers to the playoffs. After a solid first season, he slipped in 2003, scoring just 53 points. Then, in January of 2004, he suffered still another setback.
Lindros, see that coming. Collision. Yeah, you could see that coming.
Well, Eric Lindros is out of the Rangers lineup, and it could be a while following another concussion, at least the 8th of his pro career.
The fact that his own brother, younger than him, had to retire because of concussions. This guy's not in the dark.
This is something that's, you know, hit home to me when my brother can't play hockey anymore.
Another significant head injury could turn him into a vegetable. So for all intents and purposes, I mean, he is putting his life on the line, and yet people don't see him that way.
A month later, Lindros was cleared to play, but not 5 days passed when soreness developed in his shoulder during practice. After undergoing surgery for a torn labrum, he became a free agent, and in 2005 signed a one-year deal with his hometown Maple Leafs. But a wrist injury kept him off the ice for more than half the season. Lindros, a free agent again, moved in the summer of 2006 to Dallas, where more injuries plagued him.
Here's this guy, the biggest, most powerful figure on the rink, who's at the same time the most vulnerable and potentially tragic figure.
We're going to look back and say, wow, what could have been with this guy? And what still could be. Now, I haven't closed the book on Eric because this one's going to have more pages than War and Peace.
All he ever wanted to do, Eric Lindros said, was play the game for which he seemed to have been born. But it hasn't been that simple. Because of holdouts and injuries, he missed almost 40% of his team's games in the decade since he was drafted by Quebec. While still a teenager, Lindros said, "I believe every person was put on earth for some reason. Mine was to sell newspapers." Time would show the wisdom of that statement. For Sports Century, I'm Chris Fowler.